The Chargers haven't been very active in free agency, and their best hope for improvement in 2023 so far is actually not a player at all. It's new offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together for 7 seasons. This is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making this your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on YouTube and listen wherever you get your podcast. And today we're talking about Kellen Moore, the Chargers' biggest offseason addition so far, with the draft still looming, and really only bringing in Eric Kendricks in free agency, which the rest of the NFL has yawned at so far, what the Chargers have done in free agency, and we'll get to that. But the Chargers' biggest hope for improvement with what they have right now is from offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, and specifically what he can bring to the running game. And Brett Coleman did a great collaboration with the Chargers and showed exactly kind of how that could happen and why to give hope that even with the personnel the Chargers have right now, they could potentially get a lot better. So we'll talk about that, what the execs are saying anonymously about the Chargers, and basically just roasting everyone in the league, and get into the Chargers' latest mock draft tracker, where there is a clear theme, and that is adding offensive skill players for Justin Herbert. But David, this was a great breakdown that Brett Coleman did for the Chargers, worth talking about for sure. And I mean, as far as what we're talking about right now, he brought a lot of the good reasons that he could be a big addition for the Chargers, specifically just what he can bring to the Chargers offense and what he did with, the really, really impressive resume he had with the Cowboys.
Yeah, no question about it, Daniel. I mean, and we heard all about it. We heard, when Kellen Moore was brought in as the Chargers new offensive coordinator, they rattled off all of the stats and all of the amazing things that the Dallas Cowboys offense was able to accomplish under the tutelage of Kellen Moore. And this video specifically kind of brought up more of how creative and how effective his running concepts were, and really for a Chargers team and a Chargers running offense that has one of the worst running offenses in the NFL the last couple of seasons, to see those positive influences on what he's going to bring to the table in that regard is very exciting.
And the other reason we think it's going to be just a big addition for the Chargers, just based on what we felt the Chargers offense was missing the most schematically before, and just the meat that proverbially was left on the bone. It just never really felt like they were getting the most out of the talent that they're putting out there, and that's hard to do when you have Justin Herbert. But having Justin Herbert kind of, comes with the expectations that are valid. So when you see the Cowboys, being a balanced team, right, running 47.3% of the time, 9th highest rate in the league as far as the pass run balance. And then you also see first in red zone touchdown percentage, top 5 scoring offense, top 5 in third down percentage. I think it does give you hope that this Chargers offense can be better. And I think when we saw what we saw from Joe Lombardi, there is absolutely reason to believe that this addition is kind of being underrated in the grand scheme of what the Chargers have been able to do this offseason. But specifically with what how it pertains to the Chargers rushing attack, it was very informative, showing that basically even when teams knew the run was coming, and as he put it, in 12 personnel, when they would run with 2 tight ends out on the field, they would run 64.3% of the time. But it didn't matter, because what they were doing is creating mismatches along the line of scrimmage and giving the running backs more paths to choose and giving them more options, even if the runs weren't blocked correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. They were talking about how there were more tight ends on the field to provide more surface area coverage. Basically, there's just more bodies covering up more defensive players, and that allowed the running backs to have more options and more running lanes to be able to go through, instead of one designated specific spot where if it doesn't work, you got to try to cut back and create. At least this way allows the running back to use their vision and be able to, go through multiple different holes and have multiple different options to be able to get a positive play.
And it was just a lot about getting bigger bodies on the field to create those kind of mismatches, getting tight end specifically on the field. A lot of times they went double tight end on the same side. Maybe they would offset one a little bit behind the line of scrimmage, but basically what he laid out is, hey, they're widening what they have in their front to give all those different options and to give more gaps. Instead of trying to defend 5 gaps, for example, or 6 gaps, you're defending, 7, 8, 9 gaps potentially, and giving those running backs those, options to go do. And hey, if one side gets caved in, then the cutback lane is there because those backside options are all taken care of. But it was really, really impressive what he brought up about what teams did to combat that from the Cowboys, which specifically was Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, who went with a bear package and went with an entirely new defensive front to try to slow the Cowboys down. But then he was able to adjust to that and be able to run the ball effectively anyways. Basically, the Bengals trying to put 3 defensive tackles and 2 edge rushers to clog up a lot of those gaps. And then what Kellen Moore did was adjust to that, kind of went more power run game, ended up pulling the guard and the tackle, and made them have to switch out of that. He made the Bengals have to change their defense because what they tried to originally do in that chess match didn't work. So then they had to go back to the more favorable position, which is, I have 2 tight ends. I'm going to create all of these different lanes and make it so much harder to defend, even though 64% of the time when we're in this personnel grouping, we're running the football.
Yeah, one, I think the important thing to consider there is the ability to adapt and to be able to change, Daniel, because one thing we saw a lot last year, it felt like if it wasn't working with the running schemes that the Chargers were deploying, they just kind of went away from the running game and did not return to it. They just put way too much on Justin Herbert's right arm, obviously the golden right arm. But it's a lot better to be able to consider that you have an offensive coordinator now that can see something not work, be able to adjust on the fly in game, come up with a new concept, and attack that specific defensive front that they're going up against, which is what you need in the NFL. You have to have coaches that can think on their feet because they're always constantly trying to outdo each other. So you have to pay attention, and this video here gave a couple of examples of Kellen Moore's ability to adjust on the fly.
And there just didn't seem to be anything creative about Joe Lombardi's running scheme. It wasn't working, but you could actually feel like this is going to be something that even with the guys you have right now, assuming you don't bring in Bijan Robinson, right?
Right.
You can get more out of these guys. And I just don't think we were seeing that with Lombardi. I don't think he was playing to his strengths. And the one stat this video didn't bring up was that the Cowboys were the best third quarter scoring team in the NFL as well. So we can see
third quarter.
Yeah.
Oh man, Daniel, you're bringing up some bad memories for me.
100%. And the other thing is, too, David, though, the importance of what he's talking about in this and the Chargers being successful running the football is the tight end position because Kellen Moore used them a lot, which makes it feel like early on in this draft, tight ends are very, very much in play because of Kellen Moore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just reinforces everything that we've been saying the entire offseason.
And what Popper said, too, remember? It's just like, hey, I'm saying it's Dalton Kincaid because of Kellen Moore.
And it very much feels like that after this video. I think this video just kind of cemented all of everyone's thoughts on why tight end is going to be heavily featured in the Kellen Moore offense and why it's going to be a focus early on for the Chargers to address in the 2023 draft.
It was a great film breakdown by Brett Coleman. Appreciate him putting it out there.
No
really
doubt,
gave
man.
A good example of how this rushing attack can potentially be better. And let's be honest, it needs to be. And the Chargers offense needs to get a lot better without being able to add a lot more pieces, at least through free agency. We're, talking about this, assuming also the Chargers are going to bring in more explosive weapons. And when you get into the mock draft tracker later, it seems like a lot of the experts agree with that. At the same time, for the Chargers, when you don't make the moves, when you're not making any splashy signings in free agency, when you're bringing back pretty much the same offensive core, you get continuity. But what you don't get is a lot of reason to hope that you're going to be a lot better. When you get an entire scheme change like this, I feel like that hope is valid. And I think the other biggest thing, too, is just what you're getting back health-wise and how much that can help Kellen Moore, having someone like Keenan Allen on the field more, having more Rashawn Slater. But it doesn't seem like the executives are buying that around the league because when they got talked anonymously about the Chargers, they didn't have the greatest things to say, and they're pretty much yawning at what the moves, or the lack of moves that the Chargers have made so far this offseason. And didn't really love the Eric Kendricks signing over Drew Tranquill. So we'll talk about that, but I do need to tell you guys that today's episode is brought to you by the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast, and that's FanDuel. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, guys, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers right now get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when they sign up. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. All you have to do is download the free FanDuel Sportsbook app, and it's safe, secure, super easy to use, and especially, guys, when it's not football season, the best way to make basketball more interesting for me, right, or even baseball or all the other non-football sports is put some money on it, have some action on it, bring some of that juice. And right now, there's so many playoffs about to happen with the NHL. Basketball opening day just happened in baseball. A lot of exciting things there. And there's going to be a lot of fun stuff. And even if you want to just go football, there's a lot of futures that we're going to be talking about as soon as tomorrow, where we get into them picking the Chargers to have 9.5 wins in 2023. Is that too low? We're going to get into that. But FanDuel also lets you do your same game parlays, which lets you combine your bets on the same game to get a bigger payout or a chance at it. So don't miss out on your chance to get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 and bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, David, The Athletic put together a very interesting piece about how the executives from around the NFL would judge the rest of the NFL teams based on what they did in free agency. And you were talking before the show just about, and they must love being able to just anonymously rip other teams' free agency moves in the direction of their franchises. But
it just has to be their favorite time of the year,
sure.
Daniel. I mean, they get to say whatever they want, and they don't have to put their name on any of it.
I just imagine it happening like in one of those interviews, where they're talking to somebody whose face is blurred out and they're asking all these questions and they have a voice modulator. And
right.
You'll never know who it is. But it definitely seems like the Chargers got the bad end of the stick or short end of the stick on this one, because when they were talking about the Chargers, this is what they had to say. It is hard to imagine a team being that leveraged when they're probably the 5th or 6th best team in the conference. They haven't won a playoff game in 4 years. And they just lost to the Jags. So that's a pretty scathing kind of review from an executive. And it seems like to me what they're saying is, hey, the Chargers financially are in a bad spot in 2024 with the contracts they're going to have to pay to Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, all over $30 million a season. But it doesn't even feel like they have a championship level roster right now as it's currently constituted.
Yeah, no, the executives definitely enjoyed this, and they enjoyed being very, very vile about the Chargers. They do not have a lot of faith. And I mean, I understand it. I understand it. I mean, you got 4 guys, $30 million each on the salary cap that you're going to have to contend with. But the reason why they did that, the Chargers, that is that they didn't feel like they were able to see those guys on the field together. And they are banking on those guys, when they are healthy, being able to produce, and not just produce, but produce at a very high level.
Yeah, they absolutely are. They're banking on a lot more health in 2023, obviously, because it's just, if you're going to lose that amount of people, again, that amount of really quality players to really your best players, because the Chargers have a big gap in talent between the stars who we know are stars and we know who are great and the rest of the guys. That's just kind of the facts of it right now. I felt like they got more meaningful contributions from some other guys last year. I think Drew Tranquill was one of those guys. Yeah. But I think this is just like, hey, you also restructured all these contracts, and you didn't really do much to change your roster, right? They're not really giving them the benefit of the doubt on Kellen Moore, obviously, and he's not a true free agency addition. But what you did do was bring in Eric Kendricks, and I think a lot of the dismay that other executives have really is based on what they feel about that, and also the Chargers choosing him over Drew Tranquill. This was the quote: "It's Groundhog Day," one executive said. Eric Kendricks is 3 years older than Drew Tranquill, has a lot more mileage on him. If Kendricks misses 5 games in age 31 season, are we going to hear more about the bad injury luck for the Chargers? Again, like, there is some fairness, I think, to that sentiment, right? If you're going to let the young guys go and bring in older guys and those guys end up getting hurt, that is obviously going to kind of, you're going to use that as an excuse, but you kind of brought that upon yourself. Either way, I mean, I do think there is still an argument that in the short term, for what the Chargers defense needs, for who the coaches they have on the staff are now, that Eric Kendricks could be a better short-term option and a good short-term option for this defense that really hasn't ever lived up to the hype under Brandon Staley.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and when you look at Eric Kendricks as a player and you just look at him throughout his career, he is a more well-rounded player than Drew Tranquill. I mean, that's just in the facts. That's in the facts of the stats on how they are performed. And obviously Kendricks is more of a veteran. He has a lot more time in this league. And also the Chargers brought over the former Vikings linebacker coach, Jeff Howard. So he's going to be, it was a large reason why they brought him in. So they bring in a guy in also that understands the defense, has worked in, the type of defense that the Chargers run. So there's a lot of continuity there. You have a lot of veteran leadership there. And that's why it feels like a natural fit for Eric Kendricks to be in the middle of the Chargers defense.
And you're banking on a lot of kind of older guys, NFL-wise, to stay healthy, right? You have Keenan Allen and Khalil Mack, and now you're bringing in another guy over 30 years old.
Yeah.
And that is a little bit unnerving, I think, when you're talking about the Chargers, especially with their history of bad injury luck. So I get it. But, I think the other funny thing here is, too, though, there obviously weren't that many teams willing to go out there and pay Drew Tranquill. So, I feel like you're crushing him for not re-signing Drew Tranquill, but obviously Drew Tranquill didn't have that much of a market to begin with.
There wasn't a bunch of other teams out there that were wanting him, so
and not a lot of
such
other
a bad
teams,
decision.
Yeah, wanting a lot of the other players that the Chargers have leaving, right? Much more interest last year in guys like Uchenna Nwosu, than we saw this year with the guys that they still have in free agency, like Kyle Van Noy and Bryce Callahan and some of the other guys that played really well there. But I think it's fair. I do think, though, those teams are overlooking the fact that, hey, they could really get more, or at least a better fit from Eric Kendricks this year than they were getting with Drew Tranquill, and maybe that helps them in the short term. And they want to win now, and that's what the restructuring is all about. But yeah, could they have been more aggressive? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The offseason's not over yet.
Right.
But still, I think, we were hoping with those restructures that with the amount of space they have left, that they would have some more depth figured out, that they would maybe have John Johnson at this point would be very nice. But
the
other thing is, it seems like the rest of the league thinks that they're kind of not taking advantage of Justin Herbert's rookie contract. They say with Justin Herbert's extension looming, this is their window before they're going to have to bet on some younger players and bet on their quarterback to elevate the performance of a lesser supporting cast. And that is true if to the extent of David. I mean, this is Justin Herbert's rookie contract. We know the giant extension is on the horizon.
Yeah.
Are they making the most out of this opportunity? You can make a lot of excuses and injury luck and things like that, but the truth is at most you have 2 more seasons where he's kind of regulated in what he's getting paid.
Yeah.
And every season is so crucial at this point.
It is, right. I mean, because that flexibility is waning as the years go by. I mean, that contract is on the horizon, and it is going to be one of the biggest in professional sports history. So the Chargers are going to have to try to maximize the time and the space that they have right now, because that contract is going to inhibit what they are capable of doing. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, after restructuring those big deals for those aging players, the likelihood is that not all of those players are going to be on the Chargers roster in 2024. I just think that the writing is on the wall there. But regardless, it is very important that you maximize Justin Herbert and you give him everything right now while your resources are more abundant, because they're about to be a lot more restricted.
It's very fair, and teams win with expensive quarterbacks, right? I mean, We've seen it happen, and even though there are examples of, the teams going with a rookie quarterback, and that's undoubtedly a very big thing to have in your pocket because it is the most expensive position by a lot. But I think the other part of it is just, okay, can you have faith in the Chargers to build around Justin Herbert with that contract if they haven't been able to put a championship roster around him when he's making what he is right now?
Yeah.
Which I think is fair. And they have some aging players. Corey Linsley is another one of those guys. You don't want to lose another prime year of Joey Bosa and Derwin James. And when you're hearing from the rest of the league, what they're saying is, hey, you're doing a lot of all-in things, but you're still not at that contention level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was another quote that was out there in the Chiefs part of the article, which was, but between Vegas and the Chargers, it can get ugly if they're not competitive in the first half of the season. Those are potential in-season moves, and I take that as potential firings of head coaches. So a lot of teams think some guys are on the hot seats for the Chargers, specifically Brandon Staley. and they don't think that they have the roster that has them in contention enough to keep those guys safe or to feel really good about it going into the season. And the Chargers are banking on a lot of things to go right. But hey, they've won the offseason in the past, and that didn't help them, right? So maybe
At all.
not being considered the big winners of free agency isn't such a bad thing for the Chargers with their on-paper history, right? Which is a favorite term always associated with the Chargers, that and being, dark horse team of the year or whatever. So maybe that talk goes away. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. But we have seen that there are other ways the Chargers could get better, including the draft, which could totally change the complexion of this roster if they're able to find some impact starters. And at this point, the NFL experts, especially surrounding the draft, all think the Chargers are going to get Justin Herbert a new weapon to play with. So we're going to talk about that in the Chargers Mock Draft Tracker 7.0 coming up after this. All right, David. Well, the Chargers have always done a good job of tracking where all of the experts think they're going to go in the first round. This year, it's at pick 21, and they had 11 different mock drafts on their mock draft tracker, and there was a very, very specific trend, David, and that was 8 of the 11 people talked to in this had the Chargers taking some sort of offensive skill position player. 4 tight ends, 2 Bijan Robinsons, 2 receivers. So that is pretty interesting to see that there is at least some consensus on that.
Well, it just feels like everybody knows now, like whether you watch the Chargers up close or you watch the Chargers from afar, is that Justin Herbert needs more weapons, and the Chargers must address that early on in the draft. So, and that's a good thing to see because it's obvious to everyone. So the Chargers need to make it happen. I mean, you got to get more weapons. You got to maximize Justin Herbert.
Everyone always talks about the Packers not getting Aaron Rodgers first-round wide receivers. Well, guess what? Justin Herbert's gotten 0 first-round wide receivers.
There you go. Yep.
3 seasons in the league so far. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a trend there. I mean, I think the tight end part of it goes a lot to what we were talking about before with Kellen Moore, and I think is also just showing, or indicative of how good this tight end draft is coming up. There was also 2 defenders that were taken, Kalijah Kancey and Miles Murphy, and 1 offensive tackle, which we will talk about. But it does seem like, David, that adding explosive weapons for Justin Herbert is still the main priority, but at the same time, there's no real consensus on who that pick is going to be because out of all these 11 picks, there's 2 guys that were picked twice. It was 2 Bijan Robinsons and 2 Dalton Kincaids. So it does seem like it is still pretty wide open as far as who the offensive skill position player is going to be.
Yeah, which is interesting because you never know what is going to happen in the draft. It is always very exciting and very unpredictable. So you just don't know what's going to be available there or who's going to be available there. You don't know if the Chargers are going to have a player that they value at that pick there. But it also makes you feel like because there's an abundance of players around that range, the Chargers might be able to trade back and still acquire a offensive weapon to be able to help them out. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, no consensus. There's no it's going to absolutely be this guy, but I also feel like a lot of that has to do with where they are picking at in the draft.
Yeah, and Dalton Kincaid would be a great, passing option for the Chargers. I think Michael Mayer is another one that got picked on here once out of the 11. Mm-hmm. That seems a lot more likely when you look at what Kellen Moore was asking his tight ends to do. Yeah. And then, running back, obviously, the chance to pair Justin Herbert with someone like Bijan Robinson. I think you're going to continue to see that as long as guys think that he's going to potentially make it to 21, which is a huge if, I think it's still at this point. And then even the wide receivers, David, you have 2. You get Zay Flowers and you get Jordan Addison. We haven't talked a lot about Jordan Addison, but 2 playmaking wide receivers for the Chargers in the first round. At the same time, when you take a look at these lists, I think it's also important to take them with a grain of salt because last year the Chargers put out their 9.0 mock draft tracker, right? And they had 23 experts predicting the first round picks. Guess how many of them had Zion Johnson?
0.
0 of them had Zion Johnson. Only 1 of the 23 had them taking an interior offensive lineman, and it was Kenyon Green at the time. And 7 people thought that they were taking Trevor Penning. So you definitely always have to take these a little bit with a grain of salt. We thought they might take Zion Johnson, had them, one of our mocks when he was there. But it does go to show you kind of who's paying attention.
I mean, Daniel, there is somebody on this mock draft tracker that selected an offensive tackle for the Chargers. And I'm like, this guy clearly does not follow the Chargers, because if you did, then you would know that all of the Chargers starting offensive linemen are under contract for multiple seasons.
Yeah.
It is one of the very few times, one of the very rare times where there is very little controversy on who is going to play offensive line for the Chargers this season.
I think that kind of goes to what we were talking about too, just about like where the Chargers are, attributing their resources. Because the other thing is the Chargers offensive line is relatively inexpensive. They made Corey Linsley once upon a time the highest paid center, but I mean, Trey Pipkins is not up there in right tackle money, right? And also the other three guys you have are all on rookie contracts. So, well, and David, let's talk about who it was. It was Josh Edwards of CBS Sports who took Darnell Wright. And it's nothing against Darnell Wright, who's a very good player. But I mean, I think if I, showed you anything with talking about last year's mock draft tracker, a lot of people were wrong about this all the time. So he's not going to be alone in that by any means. I would be shocked, David, but also like it would be the most kind of Chargers kind of Tom Telesco thing to do, as if all of a sudden it's round one and the Chargers decide to go offensive line again.
Oh my gosh, Daniel. I mean, this is one of the few times in my history of fandom of being a Chargers fan that I would absolutely hate them taking an offensive lineman in the first round. It's just so off base with so many higher priority needs that it just can't be the pick. It can't be.
And you have to love investing in the offensive line. And I've loved that since Brandon Staley has taken over. There has been a definitive effort. And I mean, I think a successful effort for the most part, even though last year, it was a little shoddy. It's so much better than it once was, and they deserve credit for that. And I'm really bullish about the guys they have going forward with the starting five that we project for them right now. But when you're looking at this draft and what moves the needle for the Chargers specifically, to me, it's going to continue to be, can they get offensive playmakers in this draft to take their offense to the next level? Because even with his, good as the stats have been for the Chargers, especially in 2021 under Joe Lombardi, I've always felt like they were a little hollow because when you go up against good defenses, they've still struggled. And there's just such a wild inconsistency around them that it seems like they could definitely improve on that. But one thing that has to come with it is an offensive skill position player, multiple of those guys, multiple weapons for Justin Herbert. And also just, I think, the easiest path, David, to, I think, making, taking this offense to the next level, which it seems like it's been close. There's a couple of aspects it needs, and it feels like they could find a couple of those in this draft potentially.
But it also just feels like the offense is so much closer to getting you where you want to go than the defense is. So I feel like it's very, very important to focus on that side of the ball.
Amen.
And to be able to give Justin Herbert every opportunity to go out there and ball out, because we know even after that 5,000 passing yard season that we have not seen the best of Justin Herbert. We have not. It's point blank period. So the Chargers need to add weapons that will allow the Chargers to get the most out of it. And if we do see someone get the most out of Justin Herbert, we're talking about playoffs. We're talking about big-time individual awards. We're talking about potential championships. That's what it's all about. So you have to put your best player in the best position to have the most success, and that is by giving them young, cost-controlled weapons.
And we know that there are big holes on defense. We know the Chargers defense has to be better for them to be, substantially better than they were last season and to be a legitimate contender kind of, team. It just seems like the offense is so much closer to that. And if you're going to maximize what you have with Justin Herbert on his rookie contract, and one of the biggest parts of it in pass protection is already figured out for the most part.
Yeah.
Seems like it's so obvious. Hey, even if you have guys you feel good about with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer, there's obviously still something missing there. Maybe that's coming from tight end. Maybe that's just an explosive speed receiver, an explosive yak guy who can create on his own and give a little relief to Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert is good enough to win the Chargers a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
If he has the right pieces, if everything falls into place, he could do that. But it doesn't seem like they're there right now. It seems like they're missing some things that they could address.
He's missing a few
in this
infinity
draft.
stones there, Daniel. He's close, right? He's got a couple of them there, but you need to add a couple more if you want to unlock the power of Justin Thanos Herbert.
Yeah, and we're biased. We watch him every week. We see the things that don't show up in the stat sheet, right? We've seen this team let him down like we saw teams let down Phillip Rivers before him in a lot of seasons where it wasn't Phillip Rivers' fault, right?
Yeah.
Justin Herbert can't get better. You're hoping, though, that between, Kellen Moore, potentially a couple of new weapons, that could take this offense to the next level. And I think that's where the Chargers could surprise people the most
Yes.
is seeing their just offense be dominant and not even really mattering what happens defensively, because they're just going to be in every game putting up numbers in every game. That's something that Kellen Moore has done a lot in his career. And he's done it with a lot of different players too, and a lot of different skill positions. So can he get the most out of this offense and get a couple of new toys to take it to the next level? That's one of the biggest questions of the offseason, but also the biggest reason to have hope that the Chargers could take at least part of their game to the next level in 2023. But that is going to wrap things up for today's episode. We are going to be getting into tomorrow FanDuel releasing their win numbers for 2023. The Chargers are projected 9.5 wins. Is that too low? We're going to be getting into that and much more, because they do have a tougher schedule. It looks like, at least as we see it right now in 2023. So we're going to get into that, but to make sure you don't miss it, make sure you are subscribing or following for free on YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find the show on all of our social media. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports, David Drogemeyer at DroTalkSD, and the show's Twitter at LockedOnLAC. And you're going to want to know that because we're also doing Fan Mail Friday this week, so you guys can hit us up on Twitter and get your questions in, or you can call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. You can also hit us up on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. But thank you guys again for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure you guys check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, teaching you how to build a successful franchise. Two very, very successful draft guys, and you can find that show wherever you get your podcast from and on YouTube. But we'll be back with you guys tomorrow to talk about if the Chargers can get to 10 wins again in 2023. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.